I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today I'm talking about how to be czar of your own fiefdom. This is a continuation of the intoxication of power and its antidote. This week I've been barraged with an awful lot of examples of the intoxication of power. I've been listening to James Corbett talk about the coup in Russia and all the violence and ugliness that is involved with that situation. And then I was reading Caitlin Johnstone talking about Australia and how they now have $1 million fines that they're looking at levying against any company that allows disinformation on their site. And then I've been reading The Once and Future Witches, which, although it's a work of fiction, talks a lot about Old Salem and the witch trials and has a lot of very graphic examples of violence that doesn't seem to really carry a message maybe of hope, but also that there's going to be a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and loss before we get to that point. So I'd like to continue entertaining the possibility that that's not true, that we are at a turning point and that we can make this into something where instead of having to fight, we just withdraw the power over others that money is giving to the oligarchs. I think it's possible. Let's explore this. In response to my last post, Gan, who is a listener from I think the beginning of my YouTube channel, wrote that he had lived for several years without money and found that people, especially at the farmer's market, were pretty much, for the most part, nice to him. Now, I said that I thought that was a good reflection on human nature and also on his own character. I believe that Gan does something like an agricultural cooperative in Maine, and he's a big believer in living without money and figuring out how we can do this in a different way. For his online profile avatar, Gan uses a picture of Julian Assange with a banner that says free on the side, and he says he looks forward to the time that he would be able to use his own photo again. I mentioned to him that I've been recently meditating with Julian in mind. I don't know that it does anything for him, but it makes me feel better. It makes me feel like in some way I'm just maintaining a presence with Julian and just being with him in that way. And perhaps if bodies aren't real and if the mind is really what connects us, maybe that also does something for him. I don't know. What Gan mentioned is that he heard Robert Kennedy at a recent Pork Fest, and that he said that on day one, what he would do is pardon Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and that he would consider someone else, Ross Ulrich, who I hadn't heard of before. So that alone for me is the reason to maybe put my anarchy to the side and vote for Kennedy, because if that one thing could be accomplished, it would be worth it. But then I had to consider that Bobby Kennedy is speaking at PorcFest. And why hasn't anyone told me before that there's a Porcupine Freedom Festival that goes on every June in New Hampshire, which is a meeting of libertarians with the porcupine as their mascot to try to get 20,000 of them to move to New Hampshire so that they can then take over that state and turn it into a model for a libertarian way of life. Now, I'd have to say that I think my model is actually porcupine where you live. That's really what I'm all about, is turning this into something that would enable and facilitate that kind of thing wherever you are. And that's why my message in terms of what I'm looking for in a president is decentralize and get out of the way. And right now we're living under that exact opposite. A question I've been asking friends lately as a way of just shortcutting our conversations is to rate themselves on a level of 0, your government is on your side, to 100, your government is out to kill you. Now, I, of course, am at 110. But Sasha Latypova puts it no less bluntly, but a little more succinctly, where she says whatever is running the federal government agencies really intends to kill you or at least substantially injure you, damage your reproductive capacity, and repossess your assets in the process. So that, I think, wraps up the place that we're at right now. Gann said that also at PorcFest, Larken Rose, who he described as his favorite author, presented a preview of his film, The Jones Plantation. When I went to Larken Rose's website, I could see why, if Gann likes him, he would like my work, because we're saying very much the same thing, and Larken Rose is saying it brilliantly. His book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, identifies that as a belief in authority, and authorized violence is what makes every government have the ability to do what it does. So when I look at the word authority, I'm looking at being the author. And what the authorized violence does is that it separates the person who does the violence, who commits the violence, from the person who is the authority that makes that happen. And the authority is so much more dangerous. So if you look at the examples that I just cited, everything from Russia to Australia to the witch hunts to Sasha Latypova and what she's identifying as the agenda right now, all of those are a problem of authority. The fact that we recognize and give someone authority, not just over our lives and our labor, but also over our morality. We hand over our moral authority to someone else, and that is definitely the crux of the problem. Larkin illustrates this with a very entertaining short video called If You Were King. And he says, well, if you were king, you'd solve all the problems, right? You're not corrupt, so you would be benevolent. And what would you do first? Help the poor. Well, that sounds very noble and righteous. And so you give all this money away to the poor. But where do you get it from in the first place? First, you have to take that money away from other people. And what if they don't want to give it to you? Then you have to get out your mercenary army and your police, and you have to take that from them, and you have to punish them if they don't want to give it. So you have to be violent to some in order to be benevolent to others. And now I would go a step further, because I don't think it's just the money that you're giving away. First, you have to make sure that that money takes away the products of someone else's labor in a way that they wouldn't do themselves. So in order for that money to have a value, first, you have to take away the ability of everyone to own the products of their own labor. So that's why my job is to get you to think like the czar of your own fiefdom. Because as Larkin illustrates, it's not easy. This is not something that can just be solved by having a non-corrupt person that then gets in there and does nice things. So your job is to develop a system. And what money is a means of organizing labor in the interest of whoever creates it. Right now, we have the bankers who are also the capitalists who are creating the money, and their interest is in having more power over everyone else. So in order for you to make money, you need to help them in their quest to have more power over others. That purpose doesn't have to be that way, and money doesn't have to serve that purpose. But money still organizes labor in the interest of whoever creates it. So here's your task: to design money as a self-organizing system that distributes the wealth in a way that then enables the best for families and communities, however they define it. So let's define some terms here. When I use the term wealth, I don't mean money. Money is power over others, primarily the power to take away something without giving anything of your own in return. It's really the opposite of a unit of trade. But wealth, as the United Nations defines it, is in 3 categories: natural, physical, and human. The natural is, of course, the land and what's above it and below it. The physical is the infrastructure, the built properties, and all of the things that sustain our lives within that. And then the human is not people, but it's the skills and the knowledge. And all of these are our inheritance. They're not things that every generation is building new. They're things that we're getting from the previous generation and passing on to the next. So distributing the wealth is something that you don't want to do in a way that just stops the heart of the economy, where if you say, okay, everybody, you now own your house and there's no mortgage on it and you don't have to pay any rent and you can just live there. And what you've just done is say, whatever discrepancies we have are just going to land exactly where they are, and we're going to make it where there is no trade. There is nothing anyone needs to do for the last generation or pass on to the next. That's not what you want to have happen. You may have also noticed that when I talked about a system that enables things to work for families, I did not talk about enabling it for individuals. And there's a reason for that, because anytime you skip levels and go from federal or state or even community government to the individual, you've taken over the responsibility of the family. You at that point have overridden their authority. And they're the ones who are taking responsibility for each other, for children, and always responsibility and authority need to go hand in hand. If you're taking responsibility for a place, for people, then you do have the authority at that time, while you're taking responsibility for them, to determine how you want to do that. So this is as if you're taking a community and looking at the inheritance of the previous generation as if you're a family. And I can tell you, as a mother who's thought about these things, fair isn't always equal. That equal is when you do things like Solomon's decision to say, oh, you both think you own the baby? Well, cut it in half. And that's what happens with houses, say, in a divorce. They say, oh, we have to split this equally, and therefore sell it back to the banks and just cut it in half. And then the children end up losing not just their family unit, but also their home, their schools, their friends, their neighborhood. It is a destructive way of saying this is just has to be split in half and therefore turn it back into a commodity. When I look at things like my home and saying, okay, how do I make sure the use value of this is preserved in the next generation. The equal thing to do would be, say, sell it and everybody start over again. But the thing that would take more planning and more cooperation is what I'm looking at, which is my oldest daughter and her husband moving into the front house, me moving into the back garage mahal at some point, and them taking responsibility for making sure it is a place that can shelter and welcome everyone. And that's something that you have to know the different personalities and what people want. And there needs to be a sense of trust among people. That isn't always going to happen. But as a community, what you're trying to do is set that up so that those who are taking more responsibility, especially for feeding people, have the authority to do it in the way that they know is best. In this system change, the only thing that you're disrupting is taking the mortgage debt and the student debt away from the vulture capitalist, where they are using it to have power over all of our labor. And instead, you're turning it into a debt to yourself as a community. It doesn't mean you're absolving the debt. It means that rather than a debt to the bankers in order to make the rich richer, you're making it into a debt to the community. And that's something that you can distribute in ways that gives everyone power over themselves. So you can make it where families have the ability, along with their children, to decide what is it that you want to learn and who do you want to learn from. How do you want to set up that kind of system? You can make it where every person who wants to take responsibility for a home has that ability. And that ability is something that you do need to earn. But you have that way of doing it, that your government as a community needs to be enhancing home ownership, small local businesses, and small local landlords. Those are the concrete and measurable goals that are going to say whether your system is succeeding or not. And because I've been thinking about this for years, what you can do if you own your own labor is unlimited. When I think about my own fiefdom, I wouldn't have anyone who was hired to be the police. What I would do is have people who were trained in a number of different areas, who chose to say, I'm going to do this module on fire prevention. I'm going to do this module on intervention in this kind of crisis. I'm going to help with earthquake preparedness. And recently, Helene and I have been talking about property insurances because that's something that in California is going away. And so imagining how would I design that? That, of course, is a way in which money is made for money. And so people would be putting their money into this property insurance, but in the meantime, without a crisis, it's not like it's being used. And when it is used, because you, again, are controlling all your own labor, what you're really going to need to pay for from the outside is materials. But in the meantime, you can have people who are trained and who are ready and who are even helping people prepare ahead of time and make sure that if there is a fire, they all have everything ready, that they know how to manage the forest around them. They know how to make sure that there's clearings, that they're using livestock in smart ways to keep brush down. These are things that there's a lot of people who really know how to do these things and who would love to be participating in that. But I think there's also another thing that I think would be really fun. I've talked about this idea of sibling cities that we could have around the world. I think that we could also offer people in our community the ability to pay for their labor if they go and help somewhere that there is a crisis. And so whether they're trained in a medical field, whether they're trained in construction, no matter what it is, if someone wants to go help, we can make sure that they have their living expenses covered. And then all they need to do is to plug in and have that community supply them with the materials, and we can become a network of people who are caring for each other, of communities that are caring for each other. And that's something that we definitely don't have right now. To follow this up, I'm going to recommend the carrot system, which compares my family system to the community monetary system I've developed, and then when mothers ruled the world, to see how this could be different. Thank you for watching.